The sun will turn black, the earth will sink into the sea, the stars will vanish from the sky, and flames will dance before heaven itself. This is Ragnarok, the prophesied end of everything in Norse mythology, when gods and giants will meet in final battle, when the world tree will shake, and when even the mighty Odin and Thor will fall. But here's what will fascinate you. Ragnarok isn't just an ancient doomsday story. It's a sophisticated exploration of fate, cyclical time, courage in the face of inevitable doom, and the Norse worldview that saw destruction and renewal as fundamental cosmic principles. Today we're delving into one of mythology's most dramatic and philosophically complex end-time scenarios. Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, where we'll discover why the Vikings believed their gods were destined to die, what it reveals about Norse values and psychology, and how this ancient myth resonates with modern apocalyptic thinking. If you're ready to witness the end of the world as the Norse imagined it, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what we're about to explore will reveal how Ragnarok shaped Viking culture, influenced everything from Wagner's operas to modern fantasy literature, and offers profound insights into how ancient peoples grappled with mortality, fate, and the ultimate meaning of heroism. Understanding Ragnarok requires first comprehending the Norse conception of the cosmos, a complex interconnected system of 9 worlds held together by Yggdrasil, the world tree, where gods, humans, giants, elves, and other beings inhabited, distinct realms connected by mystical pathways and bound together by fate itself. The Norse universe was not a creation destined to last forever, but rather a dynamic system with a beginning, a history, and an inevitable prophesied end that would come in the catastrophic events of Ragnarok. The world tree Yggdrasil stood at the center of Norse cosmology, an immense ash tree whose branches reached into the heavens and whose roots extended into multiple realms, connecting all of existence in a living, organic whole. 3 roots supported Yggdrasil, each extending into a different realm, one into Asgard, home of the Aesir gods, one into Jotunheim, land of the giants, and one into Niflheim, the realm of ice and mist. The health of Yggdrasil directly reflected the state of the cosmos, and when Ragnarok approached, the world tree would tremble, signaling that reality itself was being shaken to its foundations. The 9 realms of Norse mythology formed a complex cosmological structure that housed different categories of beings, each with their own nature and destiny. Asgard was home to the Aesir, the primary pantheon of Norse gods including Odin, Thor, and Frigg. Vanaheim housed the Vanir, a second group of deities associated with fertility and prosperity, who had been integrated into the Aesir through an ancient peace treaty. Midgard was the realm of humans, positioned centrally and connected to Asgard by the Rainbow Bridge Bifrost. Jotunheim was home to the giants, the primordial beings who were both enemies and relatives of the gods. The other realms included Alfheim, land of the light elves, Svartalfheim, home of the dwarves, Niflheim, the primordial realm of ice, and Mist, Muspelheim, the fire realm, and Helheim, the land of the dead. This complex cosmology reflected Norse understanding of reality as consisting of multiple interconnected dimensions, each with its own inhabitants and characteristics, all bound together in a precarious balance that would be violently disrupted during Ragnarok. The concept of fate, or weird, was absolutely central to Norse cosmology, and especially important for understanding Ragnarok. The Norns, 3 female beings who dwelt at the base of Yggdrasil beside the Well of Fate, wove the destinies of all beings, gods, giants, humans, and even the cosmos itself. This fate was not merely predetermined future, but rather a complex web of cause and effect, past actions creating inevitable consequences that even the gods could not escape. The prophecy of Ragnarok represented the ultimate expression of this fate. Even knowing what was coming, the gods could not prevent it, only face it with courage. The relationship between gods and giants in Norse mythology was complex and crucial for understanding the cosmic drama of Ragnarok. The giants were not simply enemies of the gods, but represented primordial chaos and natural forces that existed before the ordered cosmos was created. The gods themselves were descended from giants through Odin's grandfather Buri, making the conflict between Aesir and giants something like a cosmic civil war. Many gods had giant ancestry or were married to giantesses, creating family connections that would be severed in the violence of Ragnarok. The creation of the cosmos, according to Norse myth, involved the gods killing the primordial giant Ymir and fashioning the world from his body. His flesh became the earth, his blood the seas, his bones the mountains, and his skull the sky. This violent creation set the stage for the equally violent destruction of Ragnarok, as if the cosmos carried within it from the beginning the seeds of its own destruction. The giants who survived Ymir's death remained hostile to the gods who had killed their ancestor, ensuring ongoing conflict that would culminate in the final battle. The Norse gods themselves were not immortal in the way gods of many other mythologies were conceived. They could be killed, they aged, requiring magical apples to maintain their youth, and they knew they were fated to die at Ragnarok. This mortal quality made the Norse gods more tragic and heroic figures than their counterparts in many other mythologies. They were doomed beings who nevertheless chose to fight against fate, knowing they would lose but maintaining their courage and honor regardless. The social order of Asgard reflected Viking Age society, with Odin as the All-Father ruling a divine hierarchy that included warriors, like Thor, scholars and poets, like Bragi, and various specialized deities overseeing different aspects of existence. This divine social structure would be shattered during Ragnarok, representing not just the end of the world, but the complete collapse of all order, hierarchy, and meaning that the gods had established and maintained. The concept of honor and reputation that was so central to Viking culture found expression in the Norse gods' relationship to their prophesied doom. The gods knew through prophecy that Ragnarok was coming and that they would die, yet they continued to prepare for battle, building their army of the honored dead, the Einherjar, in Valhalla, and readying their weapons. This represented the ultimate expression of Norse values, facing inevitable doom with courage, fighting even when victory is impossible, and maintaining honor in the face of certain death. The enemies of the gods, the giants, the monsters, the forces of chaos, had been bound, imprisoned, or exiled to the edges of the cosmos. But these restraints would not hold forever. The giant wolf Fenrir was bound by magical chains. The World Serpent Jörmungandr was cast into the ocean surrounding Midgard, and Loki himself would eventually be bound beneath the earth. But Ragnarok would see all these bonds break, all these prisoners freed, as the forces that the gods had worked to contain finally broke free and sought revenge for their imprisonment. The prophecy of Ragnarok was not hidden knowledge but was known to the gods themselves, particularly to Odin, whose relentless quest for wisdom had led him to learn the fate awaiting him and his fellow deities. This foreknowledge of doom shaped the gods' actions throughout Norse mythology, creating a tragic dimension to their existence as they worked to delay the inevitable, while knowing that ultimately they could not prevent it. The primary source for our knowledge of Ragnarok comes from the Poetic Edda, particularly the poem Völuspá, the prophecy of the seeress, where a Völva, seeress, recounts past and future to Odin himself. The prophecy began with warning signs that would herald the approach of Ragnarok, a series of catastrophes and moral collapses that would indicate the end was near. These portents included Fimbul winter, a terrible winter lasting 3 years without respite or summer, bringing unprecedented cold, darkness, and suffering to all the realms. During this endless winter, humanity would turn against itself in unprecedented violence and moral degradation as brother will fight brother. Family bonds would dissolve and all social order would collapse. This moral apocalypse preceding the cosmic one reflected Norse understanding that societal breakdown and cosmic disaster were intimately connected. The breaking of bonds and restraints represented another crucial element of the prophecy, as the forces that the gods had worked to contain would finally break free. Fenrir the wolf, bound by the magical chain Gleipnir, would break his bonds and go free. The World Serpent Jörmungandr would thrash in the ocean, causing tidal waves and rising onto the land. Loki himself, bound beneath the earth with poison, dripping on his face, would escape his captivity and lead the forces of chaos against the gods. Even the ship Naglfar, made from the fingernails of the dead, would break free from its moorings and sail toward the final battle, carrying an army of the dead. The specific matchups between gods and their opponents in the final battle were detailed in the prophecy, creating a sense of personal fate for each major deity. Odin, the all-father and wisest of the gods, was prophesied to be swallowed by Fenrir, the giant wolf. Thor, the mighty thunder god, would kill Jörmungandr, the world serpent, but would die from the serpent's poison after taking only 9 steps from their combat. Freyr, the fertility god, would fall to Surtr, the fire giant, in part because Freyr had given away his magical sword to win his bride Gerd. Heimdall and Loki would kill each other in single combat, these ancient enemies finally settling their scores. The role of Loki in Ragnarok was particularly significant and complex, as this trickster god, who had been both helper and hindrance to the Aesir, would in the end turn fully against them and lead the forces of chaos. Loki's journey from accepted, member of the Asgardian community, to bound prisoner to leader of the armies of destruction mirrored his gradual transformation from useful trickster to malevolent force. His killing of Baldur, the beloved god of light, represented the point of no return, after which the gods bound him and after which his revenge became inevitable. The participation of the dead in Ragnarok added another dimension to the prophecy, as the Einherjar, the honored warriors who died in battle and were brought to Valhalla, would rise to fight alongside the gods in their final battle. This explained one of Odin's primary motivations throughout Norse mythology, his constant working to gather the best warriors to Valhalla, knowing he would need them when Ragnarok came. The warriors feasted and fought in Valhalla not just as reward for their earthly valor, but as preparation for the ultimate battle they would fight alongside the gods. The cosmic scale of destruction prophesied for Ragnarok extended beyond the deaths of individual gods to encompass the destruction of the physical cosmos itself. The sun and moon would be devoured by the wolves Skoll and Hati, who had pursued them across the sky since the beginning of time. The stars would disappear from the heavens, plunging all the worlds into darkness. The earth would shake and mountains would fall, the sky would split apart, and finally the earth itself would sink into the sea as the waters rose to cover everything. The fire that would consume the cosmos represented both destruction and purification in the Norse imagination. Surtr, the fire giant from Muspelheim, who had existed since before the current cosmos was created, would set the 9 worlds ablaze with his flaming sword, burning away all that existed. This cosmic conflagration would reduce everything to ash and chaos, returning the universe to a state similar to the primordial void from which it had originally emerged. The survival of certain gods and the prophesied renewal after Ragnarok complicated the narrative of total destruction, suggesting that the end was not truly final but rather a transformation or rebirth. The sons of Odin and Thor, Vidar, Vali, Modi, and Magni, were prophesied to survive the destruction, along with Baldur and Hod, who would return from the land of the dead. These surviving gods would gather on the field where Asgard once stood and would find the golden chess pieces that the Aesir had played with, suggesting continuity with the world that had been destroyed. The emergence of a new earth from the seas represented the ultimate renewal, as the prophecy foretold that after Ragnarok's destruction, a new world would rise from the waters, green and fertile, where crops would grow without planting. 2. Human survivors, Lif and Lifthrasir, who had hidden in the world tree during the destruction, would emerge to repopulate this new world. This renewal suggested that Ragnarok, despite its catastrophic nature, was part of a cosmic cycle, rather than a true ending. Though whether this represented optimism or simply the recognition that the cycle of creation and destruction would continue was unclear. The psychological impact of knowing one's prophesied doom yet choosing to fight anyway represented perhaps the most profound element of the Ragnarok prophecy for Norse culture. The gods' courage in the face of certain death provided a model for human behavior. One should fight honorably even when victory is impossible, maintain courage even when hope is gone, and die well rather than live in shame. This fatalistic heroism permeated Viking culture and helps explain the fearlessness with which Viking warriors faced battle. The creatures who would play central roles in Ragnarok were not random monsters, but rather the monstrous children of Loki, whose very existence threatened the cosmic order from the moment of their birth. These beings, Fenrir the wolf, Jörmungandr the serpent, and Hel the goddess of death, represented the literal offspring of chaos and trickery, and their prophesied roles in bringing about the end of the gods created tragic dilemmas about fate, foreknowledge, and the ethics of imprisoning beings for crimes they had not yet committed. Fenrir, the giant wolf, was born to Loki and the giantess Angrboda, along with his siblings Jörmungandr and Hel. As Fenrir grew at an alarming rate and demonstrated increasingly dangerous behavior, the gods became concerned about the prophecy that foretold he would play a crucial role in Odin's death at Ragnarok. Despite being raised among the gods in Asgard, only the brave Tyr dared defeat him. Fenrir's size and strength eventually led the gods to attempt to bind him, setting in motion events that would ensure his hatred of them and his role in their destruction. The binding of Fenrir represented one of the most tragic and ethically complex episodes in Norse mythology, as the gods decided to restrain him not for anything he had done, but for what prophecy said he would do. They challenged him to test his strength against various chains, pretending it was merely a game. But Fenrir broke the first two bonds easily. Finally, the dwarves crafted Gleipnir, a magical ribbon made from impossible things. The sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. Fenrir, suspicious of this thin ribbon after having broken massive chains, demanded that one of the gods place their hand in his mouth as pledge of good faith before he would allow himself to be bound. Only Tyr had the courage to do so, knowing that when Fenrir discovered he could not break Gleipnir, he would bite off Tyr's hand. This sacrifice established Tyr as one of the most honorable of the gods, but it also ensured Fenrir's eternal hatred and his eagerness to kill the gods when Ragnarok finally arrived. Jörmungandr, the World Serpent or Midgard serpent, was thrown into the ocean by Odin when still young, but grew to such enormous size that it encircled the entire world and grasped its own tail. This serpent represented the boundary between order, the land of Midgard, and chaos, the sea, and its position encircling the world maintained a kind of terrible balance. If it released its tail, the world would be disrupted. Thor, the thunder god, had several encounters with Jörmungandr throughout Norse mythology, establishing their enmity and foreshadowing their mutual destruction at Ragnarok. The most famous encounter between Thor and Jörmungandr occurred when Thor went fishing with the giant Hymir and used an ox head as bait. Thor hooked the world serpent and began to pull it up from the depths in what might have been a premature Ragnarok. But Hymir, terrified by what was happening, cut the fishing line before Thor could bring the serpent fully to the surface. This near confrontation established both the mutual hostility between the two beings and the pattern of their destined battle. Thor powerful enough to match the serpent but ultimately vulnerable to its poison. Hel, the third of Loki's monstrous children, was given dominion over the realm of the dead by Odin, ruling over those who died of disease, old age, or other non-heroic deaths, as opposed to those who died in battle and went to Valhalla or Folkvanger. Hel's own nature was divided, often described as half-living and half-corpse, beautiful on one side and rotting on the other, reflecting her role as guardian of the boundary between life and death. Her realm, also called Hel, would play a crucial role in Ragnarok as she would lead an army of the dead against the gods. The ethical dilemma posed by the gods' treatment of Loki's children raised profound questions about fate, free will, and the morality of imprisoning or exiling beings for prophesied future crimes. The gods, knowing the prophecy of Ragnarok, took preemptive action against Fenrir, Jörmungandr, and Hel before any of them had actually committed violent acts against the Aesir. This preemptive binding and exile ensured the very enmity that would lead to the monsters' roles in Ragnarok, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy where the gods' attempts to prevent their doom actually helped bring it about. The symbolism of Loki's monstrous children extended beyond their literal narrative, roles to represent deeper themes about the consequences of chaos, the dangers of trying to control fate, and the inevitable breakdown of order. Fenrir represented uncontrollable violence and the breaking of oaths and bonds. Jörmungandr symbolized the dangerous power of nature and the tenuousness of the boundary between chaos and civilization. Hel embodied the universality of death and the ultimate powerlessness of gods and humans alike against mortality. The parallel between the binding of Fenrir and the later binding of Loki himself suggested that the gods favored solution to problems, restraining, threatening forces rather than addressing underlying issues, was ultimately futile and counterproductive. Both Fenrir and Loki, when bound, spent their captivity in hatred and planning revenge, ensuring that when they finally broke free at Ragnarok, their violence would be all the more terrible. The gods' reliance on binding and imprisonment represented a failure to address the root causes of chaos and conflict. So, tragedy of Tyr's sacrifice of his hand to bind Fenrir represented perhaps the most poignant element of the entire episode, as this brave god gave up his sword hand knowing that he was betraying a trust to prevent a greater evil, understanding that his sacrifice was both necessary and ethically compromised. Tyr's missing hand became a permanent reminder of the price paid for temporarily restraining fate, and his diminished capability would affect his performance. In the final battle at Ragnarok, the relationship between Loki and his monstrous children was complex and relatively unexplored in the surviving sources. But their shared role in bringing about Ragnarok suggested either that Loki bore responsibility for creating beings who would destroy the cosmos, or that the gods' mistreatment of both Loki and his children had pushed an entire family toward vengeance against the Aesir. This ambiguity about responsibility and causation added moral complexity to the Ragnarok narrative. The death of Baldur the Beautiful, though not technically part of Ragnarok itself, represented the event that set in motion the final march toward the end of the world, as this tragedy demonstrated that fate could not be avoided, and that the gods' attempts to prevent prophesied doom would only hasten its arrival. Baldur's death was the beginning of the end, the moment when the inevitable became undeniable, and its aftermath, particularly Loki's punishment, ensured that when Ragnarok came, the forces of chaos would be fully mobilized against the gods. Baldur was described as the most beloved of all the gods, beautiful, wise, gentle, and pure, beloved by all who knew him except for the envious Loki. He was the son of Odin and Frigg, husband to Nanna, and father to Forseti, representing everything good and noble about the Aesir. When Baldur began having dreams of his own death, dreams that in Norse belief were often prophetic, the gods became alarmed because they understood that if even Baldur could die, none of them were truly safe. Frigg's attempt to prevent her son's prophesied death demonstrated both a mother's desperate love and the futility of trying to outwit fate. She traveled throughout all the 9 worlds extracting oaths from everything in existence, every creature, plant, metal, stone, and disease, promising not to harm Baldur. This exhaustive effort seemed to work, as nothing could injure him afterward, and the gods made a game of throwing weapons and objects at Baldur, watching them harmlessly bounce away. The fatal exception that Frigg overlooked, or that Loki exploited, was mistletoe, which Frigg had considered too young and harmless to bother swearing to an oath. Loki, ever the subversive force, discovered this weakness and fashioned a dart or arrow from mistletoe. He then manipulated the blind god Hod into throwing it at Baldur, guiding his aim so that the innocent weapon struck the beloved god and killed him instantly, plunging all of Asgard into grief and beginning the chain of events that would lead to Ragnarok. The funeral of Baldur was one of the most elaborate described in Norse mythology, reflecting his importance and the god's grief. His body was placed on his ship Ringhorn, the largest ship in all the worlds, along with his wife Nanna, who died of grief, his horse, and countless valuable goods. Thor hallowed the funeral pyre with his hammer Mjolnir, and when the ship was pushed out to sea and set aflame, the gods, giants, dwarves, and elves all attended to pay respects, demonstrating that Baldur's death was mourned, even by those who were normally enemies of the Aesir. The attempt to rescue Baldur from Hel's realm demonstrated the gods' desperation to reverse his death, and perhaps delay or prevent the coming of Ragnarok. Hermod, another of Odin's sons, rode Odin's 8-legged horse Sleipnir for 9 days through dark valleys to reach Helheim. Hel agreed to release Baldur on one condition, that everything in existence must weep for him, proving that he was truly loved by all. This condition seemed achievable given the universal grief at Baldur's death. The failure of this rescue attempt came down to a single being's refusal to weep, a giantess named Thok, who most scholars believe was Loki in disguise, refused to shed tears for Baldur, declaring, "Let Hel hold what she has." This ensured that Baldur would remain in the land of the dead until after Ragnarok, when he would return to the renewed world. The cruel twist that the being ultimately responsible for Baldur's death also prevented his rescue demonstrated Loki's complete turn against the gods. The punishment of Loki for his role in Baldur's death was terrible and final, as the gods captured him and bound him beneath the earth with chains made from the entrails of one of his own sons. A venomous serpent was placed above his head, dripping poison onto his face while his faithful wife Sigyn held a bowl to catch the drops. When she had to empty the bowl, the poison would fall on Loki's face, causing him to writhe in pain so violently that the earth itself would shake, the Norse explanation for earthquakes. This binding ensured Loki's hatred and his eagerness to lead the forces against the gods at Ragnarok. The death of Baldur functioned symbolically as the death of innocence and hope, the moment when the approaching darkness of Ragnarok became undeniable. With Baldur gone, the world became darker both literally and metaphorically, as the god of light and beauty was removed from it. His absence left a hole in the cosmic order that foreshadowed the complete dissolution of order that would occur during Ragnarok, making his death not just a tragedy but a harbinger of the greater catastrophe to come. The role of Hod, the blind god who actually threw the fatal dart, raised questions about culpability and innocence that added moral complexity to the narrative. Hod was both innocent, manipulated by Loki, and guilty, his hand through the weapon, creating ambiguity about whether he should be punished for his unwitting role in his brother's death. In most versions, Hod was killed in revenge by Vali, another of Odin's sons who was born specifically to avenge Baldur, demonstrating how violence and revenge created cascading consequences that accelerated the approach of Ragnarok. The promise that Baldur would return after Ragnarok provided one of the few hopeful elements in the prophecy of doom, suggesting that the new world would be blessed with the presence of the god of light, and that his death, while tragic, was not permanent. Baldur's return would symbolize the renewal of innocence and goodness in the post-Ragnarok world, offering hope that the cycle of violence and revenge that characterized the old cosmos might be broken in the new one. The actual events of Ragnarok, as prophesied in the Norse sources, unfolded as a series of catastrophic events culminating in the final battle on the plain of Vigrid, where all the accumulated tensions, hatreds, and conflicts of Norse mythology would be violently resolved in mutual destruction. The battle represented not merely a military confrontation, but the ultimate collision of order and chaos, civilization and wilderness, gods and giants, with the fate of the entire cosmos hanging in the balance and no possibility of compromise or survival for the existing world order. The gathering of the armies that would fight at Ragnarok demonstrated the comprehensive scope of the final battle, as forces assembled from all 9 realms to participate in the apocalyptic conflict. From Asgard came the Aesir gods, led by Odin, along with the Einherjar, the honored dead who had been feasting and training in Valhalla specifically for this battle. From Jotunheim came the Frost Giants, led by Rim, eager for revenge against the gods who had killed their primordial ancestor Ymir and maintained their supremacy through violence. From Muspelheim came the Fire Giants, led by Surtr, who would bring apocalyptic flames, the breaking of barriers and boundaries that marked the beginning of Ragnarok's final phase symbolized the complete collapse of the cosmic order that the gods had worked to establish and maintain. Fenrir broke free from his bonds, his massive jaws gaping so wide that the upper jaw touched the heavens while the lower touched the earth. Jörmungandr emerged from the ocean, causing massive tidal waves as his thrashing brought him onto the land for his final confrontation with Thor. Even the ship Naglfar, made from the fingernails of the dead, broke free and sailed with an army of the dead toward the battlefield. The destruction of Bifrost, the rainbow bridge connecting Asgard to Midgard, represented a crucial symbolic and literal barrier that would fall during Ragnarok. As the armies of chaos marched toward Vigrid, the weight of their passage and the heat from Surtr's flames would destroy this beautiful structure, severing the connection between the realm of the gods and the realm of humans, ensuring that no help could come from Asgard to save humanity, and that the gods would face their doom isolated from those they had protected. Heimdall, the watchman of the gods whose keen sight and hearing allowed him to detect threats from vast distances, would blow his horn Gjallarhorn to signal the arrival of Ragnarok and summon the gods and their allies to battle. This horn blast, which could be heard in all 9 worlds, represented the point of no return, the moment when all the accumulated conflicts, bound monsters, and brewing tensions would finally erupt into open warfare from which there could be no retreat and no possibility of negotiated peace. The specific combats that would occur during the final battle had been prophesied in detail, creating a sense of personal fate for each major participant, and ensuring that Ragnarok would resolve the individual enmities that had been building throughout Norse mythology. Odin's confrontation with Fenrir represented perhaps the most significant of these battles. As the Allfather and wisest of the gods would face the monstrous wolf he had tried to bind so many years before, demonstrating that the gods' attempts to prevent their doom had been futile all along. Thor's battle with Jörmungandr would fulfill the pattern established in their earlier encounters. As these ancient enemies finally faced each other in combat, that would destroy them both. The Thunder God would succeed in killing the World Serpent with his mighty hammer Mjolnir, but the serpent's poison would prove fatal, and Thor would manage only 9 steps away from the serpent's corpse before collapsing dead himself. This mutual destruction suggested that even in death, neither force could claim true victory over the other. The battle between Freyr and Surtr demonstrated how past decisions would have fatal consequences at Ragnarok. As Freyr faced the fire giant without his magical sword, which he had given away to win the hand of his wife Gerd, this sacrifice of his greatest weapon for love would cost him his life, suggesting that even the gods' personal happiness and fulfillment contained within them the seeds of their eventual doom. Freyr's death also symbolized the destruction of fertility and growth, as the god of prosperity fell before the flames of apocalypse. The confrontation between Heimdall and Loki would end their long antagonism, as these two ancient enemies, the guardian of the gods and the agent of chaos, would kill each other in single combat. This mutual destruction suggested that order and chaos were so intimately connected that neither could exist without the other, and that the complete destruction of both was necessary for the cosmic renewal that would follow Ragnarok. Tyr's confrontation with Garm, the Hound of Hell, would also result in mutual death, as the war god who had sacrificed his hand to bind Fenrir now faced another monstrous creature in his final battle. Fighting with only one hand, Tyr would kill the Hound but die from his wounds, demonstrating that even the handicaps the gods had accepted in their attempts to delay Ragnarok would affect their performance in the final battle. The role of ordinary beings, humans, dwarves, elves, in Ragnarok was largely unspecified in the surviving sources, leaving uncertain whether these beings were meant to fight, to hide, or simply to perish in the cosmic catastrophe. The focus on the gods and giants suggested that Ragnarok was primarily a conflict between cosmic forces, with lesser beings more victims than active participants, though the two human survivors, Lif and Lifthrasir, suggested that at least some humans would manage to endure through the destruction. The plain of Vigrid, where the final battle would occur, was described as being 120 leagues in every direction, providing space for the countless warriors who would fight there. This vast battlefield would become the grave of gods and giants alike, as the cosmic forces that had shaped the Norse universe engaged in their final, mutually destructive conflict. The scale of the battlefield reflected the magnitude of the cosmic drama being enacted, as not merely individual fates, but the fate of existence itself hung in the balance. The destruction that followed the final battle would extend far beyond the deaths of gods and giants to encompass the complete dissolution of the physical cosmos itself, as the ordered universe created from Ymir's body would be unmade through fire, flood, and chaos. This comprehensive destruction represented not merely the end of a particular world, but the undoing of creation itself, as if the cosmos was rewinding back toward the primordial void from which it had emerged at the beginning of time. The death of Odin, devoured by Fenrir, represented the loss of wisdom, magic, and divine authority that had structured the Norse cosmos. Odin's son Vidar would avenge his father by tearing Fenrir's jaws apart, but this revenge could not restore what was lost or prevent the cascade of destruction that was already underway. The Allfather's death symbolized the complete failure of knowledge and foresight to prevent inevitable doom, as even Odin's vast wisdom had been unable to save him or his world. The poisoning of Thor after his victory over Jörmungandr demonstrated that even successful combat against the forces of chaos came at mortal cost. Thor, who had protected Midgard and Asgard throughout the ages, who had fought countless battles against giants and monsters, would fall not in defeat but in poisoned victory, suggesting that the distinction between winning and losing became meaningless in the face of total destruction. His death removed the primary defender of the cosmos, leaving all the worlds vulnerable to the final devastation. The cosmic fires unleashed by Surtr would consume all 9 worlds in flames that burned away not just physical structures but the very fabric of reality itself. Surtr, who had existed since before the current cosmos was created, and who would survive its destruction, represented forces of chaos and entropy that predated and would outlast the ordered world. His flaming sword would reduce Asgard, Midgard, and all the other realms to ash, completing the work of destruction that the gods' deaths had begun. The swallowing of the sun and moon by the wolves, Skoll and Hati, who had pursued these celestial bodies since the beginning of time, would plunge all the worlds into darkness and mark the end of time itself. Without sun and moon to mark days and seasons, temporal order would cease, suggesting that Ragnarok involved not just physical destruction, but the dissolution of the fundamental structures, light, time, space, that made existence comprehensible and bearable. The sinking of the earth into the sea represented the ultimate undoing of the world's creation, as the land fashioned from Ymir's flesh would disappear beneath the waters made from his blood. This reversal of creation suggested that destruction was built into the cosmos from the beginning, that the violence of the world's birth ensured its violent death, and that the ordered middle ground between primordial chaos and final dissolution was merely a temporary state always destined to end. The shaking and splitting of Yggdrasil itself demonstrated that even the world tree, which had connected and sustained all the realms, could not survive Ragnarok's devastation. The trembling of Yggdrasil during the final battle would signal the collapse of the cosmic structure itself, as the framework that held reality together began to fail. The fall of the world tree represented the end of interconnection and relationship between the realms, leaving each world isolated in its destruction. The disappearance of the stars from the heavens would complete the removal of all celestial guides and markers, leaving the cosmos without navigation or orientation. In Norse culture, where seafaring and celestial navigation were crucial for survival and prosperity, the loss of stars represented not just physical darkness, but the loss of all guidance and direction, the complete disorientation that came with the end of everything familiar and reliable. The silence that would follow the battle's chaos represented perhaps the most chilling aspect of Ragnarok's destruction. After the clash of weapons, the roaring of monsters, the crackling of flames, and the screaming of the dying, there would come a silence as complete as the darkness, the silence of a universe emptied of life, sound, and meaning. This silence would mark the moment when destruction was complete and before renewal began. The question of human survival during this cosmic catastrophe remained ambiguous in most sources, though the mention of Lif and Lifthrasir suggested that at least some humans would endure. These 2 humans, whose names meant life and eager for life, would hide in the wood of Yggdrasil itself, sustained by morning dew, waiting for the destruction to pass. Their survival ensured that the human race would continue into the new world, carrying forward memories and knowledge from the old cosmos into the renewed one. The psychological and spiritual implications of total cosmic destruction for Norse believers cannot be understated, as Ragnarok represented not just the end of the world, but the end of meaning, order, and divine protection. The idea that even the gods would die, that even Asgard would burn, that nothing from the current world was guaranteed to survive, created a worldview of profound impermanence that shaped Norse attitudes toward life, death, courage, and legacy. The cyclical nature of destruction hinted at in the prophecy suggested that Ragnarok might not be unique, but rather one iteration of an endlessly repeating pattern of creation and destruction. Some scholars interpret the Norse cosmos as moving through cycles, each ending in a Ragnarok-like event followed by renewal, suggesting that what seems like final destruction is actually transformation and rebirth. This cyclical interpretation made Ragnarok less an ending than a transition between cosmic ages. The aftermath of Ragnarok, as described in the surviving sources, involved not just endless destruction, but the emergence of a new world from the ashes of the old, suggesting that Norse eschatology included concepts of renewal and hope, alongside its emphasis on inevitable doom. This new world would be different from what came before, purified by fire and flood, freed from the conflicts and corruptions that had plagued the old cosmos, and offering possibilities for a fresh start unburdened by past mistakes and ancient hatreds. The rising of the new earth from the seas represented the primary image of renewal in Ragnarok prophecy, as the land that had sunk beneath the waters during the destruction would emerge again, green, fertile, and unspoiled. This new earth would be more bountiful than the old, with crops growing without planting and abundance without labor, suggesting a return to paradisal conditions that perhaps had existed before the current cosmic age, or that represented an idealized improvement over the previous world's struggles and scarcity. The surviving gods who would inhabit this new world included the sons of the major deities who had fallen during Ragnarok. Vidar and Vali, sons of Odin, would survive the destruction, as would Modi and Magni, sons of Thor, who would inherit their father's hammer Mjolnir. These younger gods represented continuity with the past while also embodying the possibility of learning from previous mistakes and creating a better divine order than the one that had been destroyed. The return of Balder and Hod from Helheim represented perhaps the most significant element of post-Ragnarok renewal, as these gods who had been dead during the old world's final age would emerge to live again in the new cosmos. Balder's return symbolized the restoration of light, beauty, and innocence that had been lost with his death, while Hod's return suggested reconciliation and healing of the wounds that had divided the gods in the previous age. Their reunion demonstrated that death itself could be overcome in the cosmic renewal. The gathering of these surviving and returned gods on the field where Asgard once stood, where they would find the golden chess pieces the Aesir had once played with, suggested both continuity with the past and the establishment of a new order. These chess pieces represented the games, relationships, and culture of the old gods, and their survival through Ragnarok indicated that not everything would be lost. That memory and connection to what came before would persist into the new age. The survival of Lif and Lifthrasir, the two humans who would repopulate the earth, ensured that humanity would continue beyond Ragnarok and that the new world would include mortal beings alongside the renewed gods. These survivors, having witnessed or endured the destruction of everything they knew, would carry into the new age both the trauma of apocalypse and the hope of renewal, becoming the ancestors of a new human race that would live in a purified world. The absence of certain figures from the new world, particularly Loki and the monstrous forces that had driven the destruction, suggested that the new cosmos would be freed from the conflicts and antagonisms that had doomed the old one. Whether this represented genuine improvement or simply a temporary respite before new conflicts emerged remained ambiguous in the sources, but the implication was that the worst elements of the old world would not be carried forward into the new. The relationship between the old and new worlds in Norse eschatology raised profound questions about continuity and change, memory and forgetting, learning and repetition. Would the new gods remember what happened to their fathers? Would humans retain knowledge of the old world? Would the mistakes that led to Ragnarok be avoided or simply repeated in new forms? These questions remained largely unanswered in the surviving texts, leaving room for interpretation and speculation. The Christian influence on the Ragnarok narrative, particularly in its renewal aspects, has been debated by scholars who note that some elements of the prophecy, especially the emergence of a single, all-powerful deity after Ragnarok mentioned in some versions, may represent later Christian additions or reinterpretations of older pagan material. Distinguishing between authentic pre-Christian Norse beliefs about renewal and later Christian-influenced additions remains challenging but important for understanding what Vikings actually believed. The emotional and psychological function of Ragnarok's renewal narrative for Norse believers provided comfort and hope alongside the myth's emphasis on inevitable doom. The promise that destruction would not be final, that some would survive, that a better world would emerge, made the concept of cosmic ending more bearable and suggested that sacrifice and courage in the face of doom had meaning beyond the immediate moment of destruction. The agricultural metaphors embedded in Ragnarok's renewal, the earth emerging green and fertile, crops growing without planting, connected the cosmic cycle to annual cycles of death and rebirth that agricultural peoples would have observed in nature. Winter's destruction giving way to spring's renewal, seeds dying in soil to produce new growth, forests regenerating after fires. These natural patterns provided templates for understanding how cosmic destruction might lead to renewal. The absence of detailed descriptions of life in the post-Ragnarok world left many questions unanswered about what existence would be like in this renewed cosmos. Would there still be conflict? Would death still exist? Would the fundamental structures of reality differ from the old world? The source's silence on these matters suggested either that such details were unknown, considered unimportant, or lost in the transmission of the myths through time. The impact of Ragnarok on Viking Age culture and Norse identity cannot be overstated, as this prophecy of cosmic doom shaped attitudes toward courage, fate, honor, and the meaning of existence in ways that permeated every aspect of Norse society. The knowledge that even gods would die, that no victory was permanent, that fate could not be escaped, created a cultural psychology that valued heroic action in the face of inevitable defeat and found meaning not in ultimate triumph but in how one faced doom. The warrior culture of the Vikings was profoundly influenced by Ragnarok's emphasis on fighting courageously despite knowing defeat was inevitable. The concept of dying well, with weapon in hand, facing one's enemies, maintaining honor even in death, reflected the model provided by the gods who would fight at Ragnarok knowing they would fall. This cultural value made Vikings formidable warriors who did not fear death but sought to die in ways that would earn them place in Valhalla among the Einherjar. The relationship between Ragnarok and the Valhalla concept was direct and crucial, as the Hall of the Slain existed specifically to gather warriors for the final battle. Odin's selection of fallen warriors to bring to Valhalla, his constant preparation for Ragnarok throughout Norse mythology, and the Einherjar's daily routine of fighting and feasting all aimed toward readiness for the prophesied end. This gave death in battle transcendent meaning, not as tragedy but as recruitment for the most important battle in cosmic history. The fatalism inherent in Ragnarok belief shaped Norse attitudes toward planning, risk, and fortune in complex ways that went beyond simple resignation to fate. While the ultimate end was fixed and unavoidable, the path to that end remained open to human agency and choice. Warriors could still win or lose individual battles, make strategic decisions, and shape their reputations, even while accepting that nothing lasted forever and that all glory was temporary. The influence of Ragnarok on Norse funeral practices and beliefs about death reflected the myth's teaching that death was not final defeat but transition to another state. Elaborate ship burials, grave goods for the afterlife, and funeral rites that prepared the dead for their journey to Hell or Valhalla demonstrated belief in post-mortem existence and the importance of dying well. The promise of Baldur's return from death after Ragnarok suggested that even the dead might have future roles to play. The social and political implications of Ragnarok belief for Norse society included justification for social hierarchies based on courage and martial prowess, validation of raiding and warfare as noble pursuits, and creation of shared cultural identity through common eschatological narrative. Kings and warriors could claim to be preparing for Ragnarok, gathering glory and reputation that would serve them in the final battle and beyond. The artistic and literary expressions of Ragnarok in Norse culture included the Eddic poems that preserved the prophecy, skaldic verses that referenced its themes, and visual representations in stone carvings and other media that depicted its key scenes and figures. These artistic works both reflected and reinforced cultural values associated with Ragnarok, creating feedback loops where myth shaped culture and culture elaborated myth. The gender dynamics of Ragnarok reflected broader Norse gender constructs, with male gods and warriors dominating the martial aspects of the final battle, while female figures like the Norns controlled fate itself, and Frigg attempted to prevent Baldur's death through maternal protection. The Valkyries, female figures who selected the slain for Valhalla, played crucial roles in preparing for Ragnarok, even though their roles in the final battle itself remained largely unspecified. The influence of Ragnarok on Norse concepts of time and history created a worldview that saw present events as meaningful within a larger narrative arc moving toward prophesied conclusion. This teleological understanding of history gave purpose to current actions and struggles, while also creating awareness that all present circumstances were temporary and moving toward transformation through destruction and renewal. The relationship between individual fate and cosmic fate in Ragnarok belief created complex theological and philosophical questions about free will, predestination, and the meaning of choice. If the gods themselves could not escape their fates, what chance did humans have? Yet the emphasis on courage and honor in facing fate suggested that how one responded to inevitable destiny mattered more than whether destiny could be changed. The comparison between Norse Ragnarok and other cultural eschatologies, Christian apocalypse, Hindu cycles of creation and destruction, Zoroastrian final judgment, reveals both universal human concerns about endings and distinctive Norse cultural values. Ragnarok's emphasis on gods dying alongside their enemies, on courage without hope of victory, on cyclical rather than linear time, distinguished it from other end times narratives and reflected specifically Norse cultural priorities. The preservation of Ragnarok narratives through Christian Iceland, where most surviving sources were recorded centuries after conversion, raises questions about how the myth may have been altered or reinterpreted through Christian lenses. The renewal aspects of Ragnarok, the emergence of a single supreme deity in some versions, and moral judgments on behavior may reflect Christian influence on originally pagan material. The influence of Ragnarok on modern culture extends far beyond academic study of Norse mythology to encompass literature, film, music, video games, and popular imagination in ways that have made this ancient myth one of the most recognizable elements of Norse culture worldwide. From Wagner's operatic Ring cycle to Marvel's Thor films, from heavy metal album covers to fantasy literature, Ragnarok has been adapted, reimagined, and referenced in countless ways that demonstrate its enduring power and relevance. The Romantic movement's rediscovery and idealization of Norse mythology in the 18th and 19th centuries brought Ragnarok to wider European attention after centuries of relative obscurity following Christianization. Scholars, poets, and artists found in Norse myths alternatives to classical Greco-Roman mythology and Christian narratives, valuing the Norse story's tragic heroism and emphasis on fate over divine intervention. This romantic interest laid foundations for Ragnarok's modern cultural presence. Richard Wagner's opera cycle, Der Ring des Nibelungen, The Ring of the Nibelung, particularly its final opera Götterdämmerung, Twilight of the Gods, represented perhaps the most influential modern adaptation of Ragnarok themes, though Wagner freely adapted and altered the source material. The opera's emphasis on fate, doom, and the fall of gods introduced Ragnarok concepts to audiences who might never read the Eddas, making these Norse ideas part of broader Western cultural literacy. The appropriation of Norse mythology, including Ragnarok, by various political and ideological movements in the 19th and 20th centuries, created problematic associations that continue to complicate engagement with these myths. Nazi Germany's misuse of Norse symbols and narratives, white supremacist groups' distortion of Viking history, and nationalist movements' claims on Norse heritage have made scholars and enthusiasts careful about how they present and discuss Ragnarok to avoid reinforcing harmful ideologies. The modern fantasy literature genre owes enormous debt to Norse mythology generally and Ragnarok specifically, with J.R.R. Tolkien's work showing clear influence from Norse sources in their treatment of doom, heroism, and the fall of great powers. Tolkien, a scholar of Old Norse, incorporated Ragnarok-like themes into The Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion, helping to transmit these concepts to millions of readers who might not recognize their Norse origins. The Marvel Comics adaptation of Norse mythology, beginning in the 1960s and reaching global audiences through the Marvel Cinematic Universe films, has introduced Ragnarok to generations who encounter it first as superhero story rather than ancient myth. While these adaptations take considerable liberties with source material, they have made Ragnarok a household term and sparked interest in authentic Norse mythology among audiences who might otherwise never encounter it. The video game industry's engagement with Ragnarok themes has been extensive and creative, with games like God of War, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, and many others using Norse mythology as setting and inspiration. These interactive narratives allow players to engage with Ragnarok concepts in immersive ways that differ from passive reading or viewing, creating new forms of mythic experience and transmission for digital age audiences. The heavy metal music scene's embrace of Norse mythology, including extensive Ragnarok references in bands' names, album titles, lyrics, and imagery, has created subculture associations between Viking themes and aggressive, doom-laden musical aesthetics. Bands like Amon Amarth, Enslaved, and countless others have made Ragnarok themes central to their artistic identity, introducing these myths to audiences through sonic, rather than textual or visual media. The academic study of Ragnarok has evolved considerably over the past century, with scholars moving beyond 19th-century nationalist and romantic interpretations toward more nuanced understanding of how these myths functioned in Viking Age society, how they were transmitted and altered over time, and what they reveal about Norse worldviews, values, and experiences. Modern scholarship emphasizes contextual understanding over idealization or appropriation. The environmental and apocalyptic resonances of Ragnarok for contemporary audiences facing climate change, nuclear threat, and other existential risks have made this ancient myth feel newly relevant. The prophecy's images of environmental catastrophe, endless winter, rising seas, cosmic fire, parallel modern anxieties about human-caused destruction, making Ragnarok a powerful metaphor for contemporary concerns about planetary survival. The psychological and philosophical insights offered by Ragnarok about facing inevitable doom with courage, finding meaning in struggle despite knowing ultimate outcomes, and maintaining integrity in face of overwhelming forces, speak to perennial human concerns that transcend specific cultural contexts. These themes make Ragnarok relevant not just as historical curiosity, but as resource for thinking about courage, fate, and meaning in any era. The tourism industry in Scandinavia has increasingly marketed Norse mythology, including Ragnarok as part of regional cultural heritage, with museums, reenactment events, and heritage sites using these myths to attract visitors and educate about Viking Age culture. This commercialization has both positive effects in preserving and sharing cultural knowledge and potential negative effects in oversimplifying or distorting myths for commercial purposes. The interfaith and multicultural challenges of engaging with Norse mythology in increasingly diverse modern Scandinavia raise questions about whose heritage these myths represent, how they should be taught and commemorated, and what relationship they should have to contemporary identity. Some modern Norse pagan practitioners, Asatru and related movements, claim these myths as living religious material rather than dead cultural artifacts, adding another layer to discussions of Ragnarok's contemporary significance. The Norse myth of Ragnarok stands as one of humanity's most profound explorations of endings, fate, courage, and the meaning of existence in a universe that offers no guaranteed happy conclusions. Unlike many cultural eschatologies that promise final triumph of good over evil or eternal paradise for the faithful, Ragnarok presents a vision of inevitable doom that even gods cannot prevent, where the best one can hope for is to face destruction with honor and courage intact. The sophisticated philosophical content embedded in Ragnarok, questions about fate versus free will, the relationship between knowledge and power, the ethics of preemptive action against prophesied threats, the value of courage when victory is impossible, demonstrates that Norse mythology was not primitive superstition, but rather complex cultural exploration of fundamental human concerns. These ancient stories grappled with questions that remain relevant millennia later, proving the enduring value of mythic thinking. The cultural psychology reflected in Ragnarok, the emphasis on dying well over living safely, on reputation over survival, on maintaining honor even in defeat, shaped Viking Age society in ways that made Norse peoples formidable explorers, traders, and warriors. This worldview, while foreign to many modern sensibilities, created culture capable of remarkable achievements and willing to face extraordinary risks in pursuit of glory and adventure. The tragic dimension of Ragnarok, with gods who know their doom yet fight anyway, with heroes who face certain defeat yet never waver, with cosmic order destined for destruction yet worth defending, speaks to fundamental human experiences of facing overwhelming forces, standing against inevitable decline, and finding meaning in struggle rather than in assured victory. These themes resonate across cultural boundaries and historical periods. The renewal aspects of Ragnarok, often overlooked in favor of its more dramatic destruction elements, provide important balance to the narrative by suggesting that endings are not final, that from destruction comes possibility for new beginning, and that the cycles of creation and destruction that characterize existence offer opportunities for transformation and improvement rather than mere repetition. The modern relevance of Ragnarok extends beyond its influence on popular culture to its potential as resource for thinking about contemporary challenges, environmental crisis, political polarization, technological disruption, existential risks that require courage in the face of uncertain outcomes. The Norse model of maintaining integrity and purpose even when facing potential doom offers alternative to both denial and despair. The academic and popular interest in Ragnarok shows no signs of declining, with new scholarly interpretations, artistic adaptations, and cultural engagements with these myths continuing to appear regularly. This enduring fascination suggests that Ragnarok touches something fundamental in human psychology: our need to contemplate endings, our search for meaning in face of mortality, our admiration for courage against overwhelming odds. The responsibility of those who study, teach, or adapt Ragnarok includes being aware of its historical misuse by extremist movements, its potential to be misinterpreted or appropriated for harmful purposes, and the need to present these myths in ways that honor their cultural origins, while making them accessible to diverse contemporary audiences. This requires balance between scholarly accuracy and popular accessibility. The legacy of Ragnarok in shaping how Western culture thinks about apocalypse, fate, heroism, and the ends of worlds cannot be overstated. From fantasy literature to film to philosophical speculation about endings, the patterns established by Norse eschatology continue to influence creative and intellectual work across multiple fields and disciplines, demonstrating mythology's power to shape thought. Even among those unfamiliar with specific mythic sources, the ultimate lesson of Ragnarok may be that how one faces inevitable endings matters more than whether endings can be prevented, that courage and honor provide meaning even when victory is impossible, and that the cycles of creation and destruction that characterize existence are neither purely tragic nor purely hopeful, but rather the fundamental rhythm of reality itself, a rhythm that offers both challenge and opportunity for those brave enough to engage it fully. The Norse believed their gods would die, their world would end, and nothing would last forever. Yet they also believed that how one lived, fought, and faced doom mattered profoundly. This combination of fatalism about outcomes and voluntarism about action created unique cultural psychology that shaped Viking Age society and continues to fascinate modern audiences who find in Ragnarok both ancient wisdom and contemporary relevance. As we conclude this exploration of Ragnarok, we recognize that this myth is not merely historical artifact, but living cultural resource that continues to evolve as each generation interprets it through new lenses and finds in it insights relevant to their own times. The end of the world as the Norse imagined it speaks to the end of worlds as humans in every era must contemplate, making Ragnarok truly timeless despite its ancient origins.